back to Going Unbloated, everybody, and all we do here is college football. So if you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, feel free to send gear to represent you and your team. Look around. That's what my background is made of. So if you want to be a permanent part of Going Unbloated and my background, send gear to represent yourself and your team to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. This kind of reminds me of something. Reminds me of a place that I've already been to. What am I thinking? Oh yeah. Sanford Stadium, the home football stadium for Georgia. That looks pretty similar. Could Clemson be preparing for a big move coming up? It's very interesting, the timing of this construction. It's almost like they're anticipating a move up, a step up. Just something to think about. I absolutely love it whenever I set up in front of a stadium that's not West Virginia. I'm in the middle of Clemson Stadium. Of course, y'all know that I live near campus of Clemson, but I always wear my West Virginia gear. So every time I set up, I've been to Georgia, I went to the Pitt game, I've been here several times, but every time I set up and I'm wearing this, you're wearing the wrong gear, wrong sweatshirt, and I have to explain every single time, but that's okay, that's okay. You know, I had a great opportunity a couple weeks ago whenever NC State came to Death Valley, but I had a lot of things going on that day. Well, I'm not going to pass up the opportunity again, because once again, two undefeated teams are going to meet right here in Death Valley. But real quick, before we get to that, I want to go through all my picks for this week for the top 25 matchups. FCS UT Martin at number 3 Tennessee. There's not even a line on that. Of course, you have to take Tennessee. That would be one of the biggest upsets of all time. Don't even think about it. Tennessee's winning that. Next game, Iowa at number 2 Ohio State. Ohio State is a 30-point favorite. I'm actually going to take those points because I think Iowa has a good enough defense to hold Ohio State under 30 points, period. We'll see how that works out, but I'm going to take those points. Number 21 Cincinnati at SMU. Cincinnati just a 3.5-point favorite, and I like SMU in this, so I'm going to take the points, and I'll take SMU with the straight-up upset. Next game is number 7 Ole Miss at LSU. I was kind of surprised at this. LSU is actually a 2.5-point favorite. I was not expecting that, so I'm just going to take Ole Miss in the mild upset. It wouldn't surprise me if LSU won, but I do think that Ole Miss is the better team. I think they stay undefeated. Next game, this could be the biggest game of the day. It's a top 10 matchup. Number 9 UCLA at number 10 Oregon. Oregon a 6.5-point favorite. This is an even bigger game than USC at Utah last week, and Oregon is a 6.5-point favorite. I'm actually going to take those points, and I'm going to lay those points. I think once again the Pac-12 is going to cannibalize themselves. Last week Utah beat USC. Of course, UCLA has already beaten Utah, and I think this week Oregon beats UCLA, but I do still think there's a really good chance that the Pac-12 is going to make the playoffs, because they're looking like a strong conference, and if just one team can win the Pac-12 with just one loss, I think they have a good shot of getting in. The next game, number 20 Texas at number 11 Oklahoma State. Texas is actually a 6-point favorite. I think they're punishing Oklahoma State a little bit too much, because if you go back and watch the Oklahoma State TCU game, Oklahoma State actually had that game under control, and then Mike Gundy went to save play calling, and he blew the game. I'm actually going to take the upset here, so I'll take the 6 points, and I'm going to take Oklahoma State. The next game is kind of a throwaway game, ACC game. Boston College at number 13 Wake Forest. Wake Forest, a huge 20.5-point favorite. I think they blow them out by 30, so I'm going to lay those points. Next game, this could be an interesting game. Memphis at number 25 Tulane. Tulane is a 7-point favorite. Tulane is looking really good. I don't really trust Memphis, although they have been good at times, but I'm going to take the home team, Tulane, and lay the 7 points. The rebound game for Alabama, number 24 Mississippi State at number 6 Alabama. Alabama 21-point favorite. Last year, the same exact scenario, coming off a loss on the road to Texas A&M, playing Mississippi State. They blew them out. Alabama's a 21-point favorite. I think the same thing happens. I think Alabama's mad. They're at home. They're going to blow out Mississippi State. Next game is going to be a Big Ten game. Minnesota at number 16 Penn State. Penn State 4.5-point favorite. Penn State, I think once again they're being punished for being blown out by Michigan, and they should be, but this is a home game and Minnesota is not looking that great. I'm going to lay the 4.5. And then the last game before we get to Syracuse and Clemson is going to be number 17 Kansas State at number 8 TCU. TCU undefeated, 3.5-point favorite, but I think the last undefeated team in the Big 12 falls. I think Kansas State is good enough to go on the road and beat TCU. TCU was lucky to beat Oklahoma State, and I think they have a little bit of a letdown game. I'm going to take the 3.5 and pick Kansas State for the straight-up upset. Now for the game, the actual reason why I'm in front of Clemson's football stadium. That's number 14 Syracuse at number 5 Clemson. Who thought that this was going to be a showdown of undefeated teams at the beginning of the year? Not me. This has totally surprised me. Well, not really Clemson, but Syracuse. Listen to these stats. It's not that, Syracuse has had some lucky breaks, but Syracuse is a good team. First, let's talk about Clemson. They're averaging 38.6 points per game, which is 21st, and allowing 19.7 points per game, which is 26th. So their point differential is plus 18.9. That's a pretty good gap. Syracuse is even better. I was not expecting this. They average 36 points per game, which is 29th, a little lower than Clemson, but their defense is allowing just 13.2 points per game, which is 9th. So their scoring difference is plus 22.8. That is a massive, massive gap. I will say this, they were lucky to beat Purdue. They got a lot of help from the refs in that game, and they were sort of lucky to beat NC State because NC State was without their starting quarterback. So they've got some pretty good bounces. I don't think they're going to get any good bounces here. However, Syracuse has always played Clemson very, very well, even when they're bad. Well, this year they're good, so I think they play them good again. And the spread on this is Clemson is favored by 13.5. A little closer than a lot of people were anticipating, including myself, but there's a reason for that. First, let's look at the playmakers. For Clemson, the quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei, 137 for 213. He's thrown for 1,665 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. The running back, Will Shipley, 96 carries for 567 yards and 8 touchdowns. 2 great playmakers for the Clemson offense. But Syracuse, they also have a couple of great playmakers. First up, their quarterback, Garrett Schrader, 106 for 152. He's thrown for 1,434 yards, 12 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions. So Syracuse, they don't turn the ball over very much, at least whenever it comes to the quarterback. Their running back, Sean Tucker, 124 carries, 644 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Does Syracuse have the better running back? Maybe this is going to be the matchup. Clemson has the better quarterback, and Syracuse has the better running back. So what Syracuse needs to do is they need to slow this game and limit possessions for Clemson. That's the game plan. They have to do that. For Clemson, they want to run hurry up and score as many points as possible, because even though the defense isn't bad, it's not elite. They have given up some scores that you're like, how did that happen? So 2 opposite game plans. Syracuse, slow the game down, limit the amount of possessions that Clemson has. That way they have to make each possession count. And Clemson's game plan is going to be the complete opposite. They're going to try to run as many plays as possible and try to get as many possessions as possible and wear that Syracuse defense out. So how did these two teams get here undefeated? Well, Syracuse, they've had a really easy path, not going to lie. Here's what they've done so far. They beat Louisville 31-7, at UConn 48-14, a win over Purdue with a lot of questionable calls, 32-29, a close win over Virginia 22-20, and Virginia's not a very good team at all. Blew out FCS Wagner 59-0, and then took care of number 15 NC State 24-9. However, NC State did not have their starting quarterback. For Clemson, I think they've actually gotten their toughest stretch of their schedule out of the way. This is going to be their last really tough game. Here's what they've done so far. They went on the road to beat Georgia Tech 41-10, took care of FCS Furman 35-12, beat Louisiana Tech 48-20, went on the road and beat number 21 Wake Forest 51-45 in 2 overtimes. Wake Forest might be better this year than what they were last year, and they were pretty good last year, so that's a good win. And they came back home and beat number 10 NC State 30-20. NC State had their starting quarterback in that game, so that's a better win for Clemson. Went on the road, beat Boston College 31-3, and then went on the road and beat Florida State 34-28. I will say this, Clemson had a big lead against Florida State, and they allowed Florida State to get back in the game, and it came down to an onside kick. But a win is a win. Speaking of their schedule, what about afterwards? Syracuse's schedule gets much, much tougher, and Clemson's schedule gets much, much easier. So after this game, Syracuse gets Notre Dame at home, at Pitt, Florida State, at number 13 Wake Forest, and at Boston College. Syracuse, after starting the season 6-0, could easily end up finishing either 8-4 or 7-5. That is a tough schedule to end the season. But for Clemson, the easiest stretch is at the end. This is going to be their toughest game remaining. But after Syracuse, they get their bye week. Then at Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, South Carolina. Maybe the road trip to Notre Dame could be tricky, and the weird thing about Notre Dame is they've been losing to crappy teams and beating teams that they shouldn't. So Clemson, they definitely need to get up for that game. I don't think Notre Dame's very good, but for whatever reason, they've been beating teams that they shouldn't beat. So play your A game in that game, because Notre Dame is most definitely capable of upsetting you, Clemson. All right, now time for this game. Like I said previously, Syracuse has played Clemson very, very well, even when Syracuse was bad and Clemson was good. This year, I think Syracuse is actually good, and I do think that their game plan is going to work to some extent. They will be able to slow the game down and limit possessions, but it's not going to be enough. This is going to be a jacked up home environment. I'm kind of surprised that it's a noon kickoff. That's kind of a letdown. It should have been at least at 3:30, maybe a 7 p.m. kickoff, but it's a noon kickoff. That doesn't matter. It's going to be a packed house, and I do think Clemson gets the win, but I think Syracuse has a good showing here. I think Syracuse actually covers the spread, so I'm going to take Clemson in a close game. I'm going to say in the neighborhood of 28-20. It's still a great win because Syracuse is undefeated. They're a top 15 team. Clemson takes another step forward to getting to the playoffs, and I think this year Clemson does get to the playoffs. This is their toughest game remaining. They have to go on the road and take care of Notre Dame. Once that happens, if they're still undefeated, they will finish the regular season undefeated, and yes, they will be able to handle whoever wins the Coastal. Right now, it looks like North Carolina might do that, but North Carolina isn't that good of a team. So Clemson has a clear path to get to the playoffs, but it starts with tomorrow against Syracuse. They've already gotten past Wake Forest. They've already gotten past NC State. This is the biggest hurdle remaining. Luckily for Clemson, they don't have to go to the Dome. If this were in the Dome, this might be a different score prediction, but it's at Clemson. So I'm going to take Clemson in a very, very close game, 28-20. Their defense is going to have to work probably a little bit more than what they thought they would because Syracuse is going to slow this game down, limit possessions, but Clemson does just enough to beat Syracuse at home. Big win, stays undefeated. We'll see what happens to Syracuse after this. Can they bounce back from a loss if they lose to Clemson? Because the rest of their schedule is the toughest part of their schedule. Y'all let me know in the comments section. Number 1, do you think Syracuse or Clemson wins this game? Number 2, what did you think about my predictions for the other top 25 matchups? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.